Hey, rookies, and welcome back to the Rookie Farmer Podcast. This is the place, this is the home for all things small scale agriculture and market gardening. Whether you are an aspiring farmer, maybe you're just now starting your farm business, or you've been growing for many years and you're just looking for new inspiration, new insights, and maybe some encouragement in your operation. Either way, you have come to the right place. If you're new here, my name is Alec. I am your host, and I'm also the grower here at Crop Culture Farm in New Bern, Georgia. All right, folks, one of the key parts of this podcast is not just interviewing interesting people, learning from experts, and so on, but is hearing from the real people who are right in the thick of it, just like myself, just starting their farm a couple years in, figuring it all out as we go along. And that's always been a big highlight of this show. And if you remember from last season, we interviewed a couple of really amazing rookies. And today we have the joy and the delight to do the first of hopefully many of our reoccurring interviews with some of our rookies back from season 1 in 2025. And today starts that tradition, and we sit down again with Colton Simpson of Simpson's Market Gardens in Maryland. Now, if you didn't listen last year, Colton he was part-time doing a little bit in his backyard, and he was just about to get onto a new piece of property. And so now, almost exactly a year later, we're sitting down again, getting some insights into how things have been going in 2025 on the farm, how his sales channels are changing, evolving, growing, and all of the wins and the losses and the struggles that come with this new property. So, but without further ado, let's get into more of that with Colton Simpson of Simpson Market Gardens. All right, folks, today we have our first, technically our first reoccurring guest coming back. We get to a former rookie, maybe still current rookie, depending on how he feels about himself. Yeah, so.
Yeah.
But Colton Simpson is back from Simpson's Market Garden. Colton, thank you so much, man, for sitting down with me this evening.
It's a pleasure. It's a pleasure.
Yeah, this was one thing that I wanted to do from the very inception of the show, was grab a couple of young new farms and kind of follow their journey and sort of be like, all right, here, hey, in that last episode, you talked about X, Y, and Z that you wanted to do in the year of 2025. And now that we're in 2026, let's kind of touch base and see how that thing went. Because I think that's another thing is people can talk big game and they can have huge plans and aspirations. But as you know, and I know, things don't always go as planned. Sometimes new opportunities pop up, and sometimes old opportunities go away and things change. But for the people who maybe haven't listened to that first episode that you did with me last year, or maybe they just want a refresher because it has been like a year ago, tell us a little bit about yourself and about your farm operation.
So I'm Colton Simpson. I run Simpson's Market Garden out of White Plains, Maryland. And so we're kind of in the middle southern Maryland. And so I started out last year with a part-time farm in the backyard, which was about 5,000 square feet, including beds and walkways, broken down into 20-foot beds. And then this year I took on a 1.5-acre property, which is about 20 minutes down the road from where I am, along a pretty predominant highway. And there I kind of expanded my operations along with the use of a high tunnel. So I went from part-time last year to full-time this year. And so kind of trying to make my living at the farmer's market and kind of local wholesaling game. So
Overall, I
um,
guess, I mean, we can get into the nuts and bolts of it, but going into 2025, on a scale of 1 to 10, if you were to rank, I think this year is going to be a 7. Where do you think you would have ranked 2025, this time last year?
so coming into 2025, especially pushing when I had taken the lease on the property, which was in February of 2025. So hadn't broken ground, was snow on the ground still. I was pretty confident. Sales of especially like salad greens, arugula, lettuce mix, spinach, all that were quite high. Microgreens were popping. did deliveries over the winter for those, and so that was doing quite well. And so coming into kind of that first spring season, I was pretty optimistic, and then kind of learned the harsh realities on taking over a new property that you had driven by on the road, but you had never stepped foot on. And so that kind of quickly, once we got into the spring rains and everything, kind of maybe set me straight. But I was pretty optimistic. I thought that it was going to be maybe not a breeze. I had heard quite a few bad experiences, but thought, oh, it's going to be pretty easygoing. It's just an extension of what I've been doing in the backyard farm, and it was not. So,
Gotcha.
um,
Yeah, unfortunately, sometimes you have reality checks and things don't quite go as planned. But before we sort of get into all the minutia on that, give us an idea now, kind of what are your main sales outlets looking like? Like who are you selling? Because I know it's changed quite a bit from when we talked last year.
So we're currently in December, and so right now the farmers market has officially ended, and I started my own. I call it the mini market at a local. They're a juice market, and so they sell raw juice and smoothies and coffee. And so, along with another farmer at my market, started our own little. We call it mini market there. Once our main farmers market had ended, I also sell through a local grocery, which popped up in a what was officially like a food desert. And so sell through them, sell lettuce mix, kale, collards, as well as microgreens. And then I also stock some produce in that juice, we call it the market, that I do the farmer's market on. The predominant kind of sales stream was the main farmer's market that I had done last year, and then kind of try to expand outside of that. Local farmers markets aren't really that big of a thing, or we're kind of limited on options. And so I kind of try to focus on that, and then expanded first into doing the local grocery stores, but then also an online store for ordering for pickup and delivery. And so I still took a couple week break for that during the winter, but coming into like early January, that'll pick back up, and that does quite a bit through microgreens and some like lettuce mixes that I still have going now.
Awesome, cool. So one kind of quick question, and I don't think we covered this last time, but with you being in Maryland, obviously Maryland's not super big. What's sort of like the closest metro to you? I mean, it's probably not DC. Is it Baltimore? Is it somewhere in Virginia? Like what sort of would be like the closest big city?
So we have a pretty big, quite a few farmers markets in Alexandria, which would be like the closest. So that would be technically Virginia, but that would be an hour in change kind of away. Outside of that, a lot of people from our area that farm. So we're Southern Maryland. So you see this kind of weird shape down towards the tip. I'm kind of down towards the bottom there. And so a lot of people go to Alexandria. The few kind of local farms that are still hanging on, a lot of them moved to selling at the Alexandria market, selling at the DC markets, or some of them travel kind of to more northern Maryland and sell at some markets up there. But most of them would be hour and a half, 2 hours kind of minimum of a haul. And so kind of in our area, we have a handful of farmers markets in Southern Maryland, but we have some big vendors at some of them, but they're kind of more large, long-term established farms for those. So if I was
So
looking outside of
Alexandria,
leaving our area, yeah.
yeah. So Alexandria, which I mean, would it be safe to call that like a suburb of DC? I would say.
I mean, it's kind of
Yeah,
they have their own kind of downtown city, kind of in their own
yeah,
right, So,
yeah.
definitely
And
not
that's
the size of DC, but
and
probably market
it's
more
an
like,
hour.
yeah,
Yeah, so that's an hour away.
hour and a half probably, yeah.
Hour and a half. Okay, yeah. See, that's pretty similar. Yeah, Atlanta's about an hour to be like downtown. It'd be probably hour 15, hour 30, depending on traffic, which we are known for. Um, but yeah, no, I'm just interesting, and maybe that'll come up later when we talk about future sales streams and all that sort of stuff. But overall, what were sort of those connections and the ways that you were able to connect with the little local grocery store and with this juice market? Was it just word of mouth? Was it you putting out feelers? Did people find you?
Kind of cold calling. So for the local juice, they started at the same farmers market that I sell at, and they still sell at that, which is the La Plata Farmers Market. And so they still sell there, and they started their own retail kind of brick and mortar location they sell out of. And so that was kind of an easy transition. But before I had first transitioned into that, I had started selling to what is called the Oasis Market in Indian Head, which is a small grocery store, which again had popped up kind of in a food desert. And that was just more kind of cold calling, reaching out, being like, "Hey, I'm a local farmer. I want to see if we can negotiate. I have good sales as it is, and I have a lot of demand in your area from people that want that kind of brick and mortar. They don't want to go out on a hot, Saturday morning in the middle of the summer. They want to go get my lettuce elsewhere. Can we work out a deal?" And so that turned out quite well, and that I do pretty good sales through that. That it's been a nice experience.
And what was that process like? Because I know I don't work with any grocery stores. There's been one store that I attempted to approach. People had recommended like, hey, they buy local stuff. And then I went in, and once I actually like went in and like shopped at the store, I was like, I don't think this is going to really work out. So I never even really fully approached them. And so what was that process like of, are you negotiating price? Are you working out, what does delivery and receiving look like? Kind of give us a little insight into that process of working with you selling wholesale to a retailer.
So it's actually been our agreement is actually consignment. And so they have their own existing customer base. And so part of the agreement was that for the select products that I sell, like collards and kale, they won't stock their own collards and kale. I will stock the collards and kale. And because some of these items weren't moving necessarily super quick. Again, it's a pretty new grocery store. They had only opened up kind of in the fall of last year. And so they're still trying to build themselves up as well. And so it kind of took a weight off their shoulders in a way for me to say, hey, I will stock some of these items. We kind of negotiate on a cut that they get. I keep track of the sales as far as the how much I drop off, how much I spoil. So if it doesn't look in good shape, I chuck it, and I mark that down, send that all over to them, and I get a check kind of every week, every other week. And so that's kind of the agreement for that. And then that also was because I was pretty serious on or pretty determined to try to keep my prices consistent. And so I wanted to be able to direct a lot of people from that area who buy from our farmers market to be able to say, hey, you can get it for the same price at this other location, which is, so you know what you're getting into, where you are. Oh, you buy my lettuce from me for $4, you get it from there. And so that does take a cut of my sort of profit, but at the same time, it's kind of a good trade-off, being that it's labor off of my back of having to physically sell it myself. And they have their own recurring customer base, and so I've picked up quite a few customers just from people saying, "Oh, what is this lettuce here from this business?" And so in the future, my plan would be to kind of expand my offerings into peppers and heirloom tomatoes and things like that as they build up their own customer base. That kind of consignment deal without them having to stock their own heirloom tomatoes. Hey, I can stock the heirloom tomatoes for you, and we work out kind of that same deal. And so that same agreement is kind of the same with the raw juice market there, which is the same kind of consignment. So it's a cut of it that they receive. And so that kind of we sat down, kind of all negotiated that. Certainly when I first came to the grocery, I said, "Hey, I have a bunch of samples I can bring y'all. I'll bring you my lettuce, my collards, my microgreens. I can show you how fresh they are. I can show you how long they last." And then I even kept aside, which I felt was pretty good for my case, some microgreens that had been marked for sale previously a week before. And so I brought those in as well. Hey, these were marked, stamped with a best by date or a packing date of the week before. Let me show you how good they hold up. So it's not going to spoil in 3-4 days. You're going to have an upset customer. And that, I think, is kind of what sold them. Being able to show, hey, the shelf life on my sunflower shoots is 2 weeks. On my lettuce mix is 2-3 weeks kind of minimum. And so that, was definitely pretty an important part, and it's something that I think kind of going forward, if I'd span to anyone else, I would definitely love to bring kind of the same samples and the kind of proof of longevity.
Yeah, that's smart, because I wouldn't have. I mean, I definitely think that the sample idea is imperative. I mean, you need to be able to prove, like, hey, this is what I got. I think only in one case have I ever gotten a restaurant account where they bought something before they tried it. And that was purely because of a reputation that I had from another restaurant, like another chef who was really good friends with this guy. And so he was like, if such and such buys your stuff and he vouches for you, then it's like, yeah, I'll let me buy 10 pounds of okra from you. We need it this week. But any other time, it's always been drop some stuff off, let you try it, tell me what you think, and if this is something you want to do, And honestly, that's usually how we add new varieties to to an order with a chef. I dropped off 10 pounds of black Spanish radish with 2 restaurants today just to let them try it, and I did it with another restaurant last week, and then they ordered 15 pounds this week, and they're probably going to order 30 next week. And so, yeah, I mean, I think doing the sample, it's an old adage, but it's a true one. You let them try it and they'll buy it. But I think it's really wise that you brought in the microgreens and you're like, listen, like you can see it and it can be perfect when, a day, 2 days after it's harvested, but being able to show the longevity of it as a huge selling point. So that's kudos to you for having that idea, because yeah, I mean, that's the reality of setting something in a store or sending it to a restaurant and just saying like, wish you the best. Like, hope you can sell it.
Yeah.
And so, but then being able to know that it's gonna have legs, it's gonna last. It's really, really smart. Now, do you have an agreement? So is it like, we're gonna sign sort of like a consignment deal for a year? Is it just sort of month to month, week to week? What's sort of the terms of that agreement that you have with them?
So it's kind of a rolling agreement right now. So there's no, kind of set term on that, but it's for the duration that I stock it. They won't stock their own competing products. Of course, they have their own lettuce mixes, which are from the large kind of corporations, but as far as the collards, kale, microgreens, there is no competing product. And so kind of as we get into other products, maybe think like arugula and things like that, that's definitely something I'd want to more kind of iron down. Like, hey, is there going to be competition from your own competing products? But the rolling kind of agreement is especially working right now because, no one's really going to pull the rug from someone else if suddenly they won't have collards, kale, or kind of anything else like that stocked, certainly. So it's not like a term length, but it's the payout is kind of done week by week or biweekly by biweekly, and that I manage on my end. I have a spreadsheet that I've done up to keep track of that, and they kind of keep track, kind of maybe a bit more by eye. Maybe it's a bit of a trust thing, but that way I can forward. And they have their own point of sale POS system, and so that if there was ever any question, they could always certainly come back and check that. So it's a bit lax. They reach out to me and let me know if something is out of stock or if it's about to be out of stock, and they're like, hey, you got to really run some lettuce mix over. Especially in the fall and around Thanksgiving, things were moving really quick. I was stocking their walk-in cooler with tubs of collards and kale, and they were, you know, uh, 48 hours later, if even, we're like, hey, you need to come and restock some more pretty quick. So they will reach out about that, but as far as the kind of duration, it's kind of more by feel. So I normally swing by every 7-10 days, if not a little bit. 7-10 days is kind of the turnover. The majority of the collards, that's when I spoil everything for collards and kale, and then for the lettuce mixes, that kind of gets restocked every 3 to 5 days, along with the microgreens. So everything's pretty fresh, and I make quite a few runs, normally once if not twice every week to them. So, but that's kind of been with the build up. Originally it was once a week, and then now it's kind of picking up that twice a week. So
That's awesome. It sounds like it's working. It sounds like it. I mean, I don't know what sales look like, but if if you went from once a week to twice a week and at busy times of the year, within 2 days, your extra surplus is already gone. It sounds like it's working out. I have two questions kind of on this part of the conversation. One, now that you've kind of done almost a year, we'll say, working with them, and hopefully you've sort of learned the beats of, all right, Thanksgiving's really busy. Maybe this part of the year is kind of slow. Are you taking sort of those ebbs and flows of their sales into account with your production for this year, for 2026?
yeah, definitely. So I can pretty accurately predict when it comes to like lettuce and microgreens, like what the kind of sales per week is for that. I will say outside of Thanksgiving and kind of around holidays, trying to figure out the sales of collards and kale and things like that is crazy. One week they're gone in 2 days. The next week it seems like nothing kind of moves. I say we don't have a big local food scene in this area. I think we definitely don't. It seems like a lot of grocery stores, not to hate on them, but they seem to sit on some fresh kind of produce for a little bit, and from like even the big chains. And so I think it's that building the trust in the brand, and that it's from me, it's going to be high quality, it's going to last in the fridge. And so I think there's some really loyal customers that is kind of why there's such an ebb and a flow. They'll come by, buy 3, 4 of something, and buy half my stock that I might have. But no, I definitely, being able to keep track is pretty important coming into 2026. It's made it enough of an impact on my sales, especially of lettuce mix microgreens, that it's having to be accounted for. It's not just extra kind of fluff or leftover.
Awesome. And that's perfect. That's exactly what we want to see. We want to see it's like this is becoming a mainstay, a consistent part of your sales. Because I know we attempted that last year with one little, it was a coffee shop, and they desperately wanted to be able to turn it sort of into like a local market, and we were working with them, and they're great. They're friends. We're still friends, but between like equipment issues, like, you show up and you're like, the cooler's, sitting like 65 degrees instead of 40, like, or, 35, like, and it's like, it affects the product. And then, and then it's just, with all businesses, you try stuff and you're like, maybe this isn't what the direction we need to go. And so we ended up walking away from that. And it wasn't it wasn't like a huge impact to our sales either. It was kind of an extra thing. And so the fact that it's becoming a mainstay part of your, yearly revenue, it's good. With that being said, now that you've kind of dipped your toe into selling to a retail establishment, do you think that's something moving forward that you might try to expand, finding other either local markets, or maybe trying to find a larger establishment, maybe in that Alexandria area, or maybe just something else that's relatively close that maybe you could drop stuff off weekly instead of every couple of days? Is that something that you want to expand in the future?
Yeah, definitely. I mean, I keep looking for kind of new retail places to sell. I think, unfortunately, and the same thing is the lack of a local food scene. We just don't have a lot of kind of small independent grocers. It's kind of that same issue. And so that was part of the expansion of the raw juice market, which they themselves had only opened up for a month, probably, by the time I had set up in their own cooler that they had. And so that is similarly, that's kind of building from the ground up. And so that wasn't maybe fully intended to be like a mini grocery store, but that's kind of the direction I'm trying to send it. And so, but similar to like the grocery store, there's definitely quite a lead time to building customer kind of noticing your brand and kind of brand awareness. I definitely pushed quite a few Facebook ads in the area of the grocery store for a little bit, because the first maybe month or two were pretty slow, and especially of the lettuce mix. But I think that's kind of to be expected. I mean, pretty people are pretty stuck in kind of what they know and what they like. They like their, X brand of lettuce mix. They're just going to keep buying it, and so it
Yeah, for
takes
sure.
quite a bit for them to pick up on you. And so, kind of looking at other locations. Unfortunately, we don't have a lot of independent grocers. Even I feel like as I try to expand to that kind of Alexandria, and the ones that we do have are kind of organic only chains, and so it's kind of tough. And so I've been definitely looking to building out my own, I call it like distribution, or my own hub for kind of places that you can buy my things. So similar to the fridge that you had mentioned, kind of similar system to that of like off farm stand sort of. And so that's kind of what the raw juice market is becoming, a bit of an off farm stand, where coming into next year my plan is to stock, beets and carrots, and along with all my normal microgreens and lettuce mix. So it's some place that people can, outside of the farmer's market, run by and come buy the product. It takes a lot of weight off my shoulders to not have to rely on the market sales. Oh, it rained this weekend and
Yeah,
suddenly
man.
people can't get your product. It can be quite, scary some weeks. You see the high winds and the rain and you're like, oh no. So I mean, I want to be able to direct people towards that, but I mean, people are really convenience minded. I mean, hey, I order from Amazon myself. I mean, but
How dare
having
you?
kind of those little hubs, yeah, having all those little hubs or sales locations kind of throughout the area is, I think, my long term intention with that. So people don't have to drive a half an hour to come and buy my product. They can,
Yeah.
just drive 10 minutes down the road.
And I love that you are, like you said, kind of massaging one of your customers. That sounded wrong. But sort of like massaging that relationship with one of your customers to sort of push their business in the direction that better serves you, and not to say that you're like, this is what you need to do or
Yeah.
I'm leaving, but it's like, hey, like we have this opportunity, sales are getting a little bit better. Have you considered maybe we start stocking more product? And I know you didn't initially think that you were going to be doing this, but we have opportunity that we can both benefit here. And so I think that's smart. And hopefully you see some more success with that in the future. I want to get to farmers market stuff in a little bit, but just to touch on one other thing that you said, talking about the lead time, that's a real reality for, I would say, most farms, unless you have like a really established brand in a general area, a farm that has a really good reputation that people will seek you out, or if they find out you're in a new place, they'll go out of their way to buy from it. But if you're a new farm like you and I are, it's going to take some time. Like we were talking before, and I've mentioned it on the show previously, at the Athens market, we started in the wintertime and sales were insane. They were so good. There was just two farmers, and I sort of went into it expecting that it was going to stay that way. And then once everybody came back, and I had heard some words from customers and from the market manager saying like, these people are loyal. Like these are some really loyal customers. And it was simultaneously like an encouragement and also a bit of a warning. Like they're really loyal to the farms that they buy from. And I pretty quickly realized that when we got into March and the regular market opened up and all the other farmers came back, when our sales got cut in half, it's like, oh, okay, we're back into that lead time. We're back into, and it took a couple of months. Yeah, it probably took 3 months for us to get back to those numbers that we needed to be hitting weekly, and now I feel like we've carved out a nice little niche. We just recently moved spots. Another farmer left for the year, and so we moved into their spot. And people came up to us like, "Oh my gosh, like, you're here!" Like, and it's not like we're on like the other side of the street. Like we're literally like 60 feet away. But like you said, people are just so accustomed to their routines and what they know and expect, and so they were kind of like taken aback at the fact that we had moved. And they're like, I walked over there expecting to see you and I was disappointed because you weren't there. And so it helped me realize and encourage me that it's like, oh, okay, no, we're having to put in the work and we're going to have some lower sales as we're building our reputation. We're building trust with these customers, these super loyal customers. Yeah. And so to hear that people are coming and expecting to see us where we're supposed to be, and we're disappointed initially when they thought we weren't there, that's like, okay, we're doing something right. We just need to stick it out. We need to dig our heels in and just keep going. And that's, and I think it's just a reality of being a new farm is that, overnight success is more than likely not going to happen. It's going to take time. It's going to take potentially months, maybe even years for you to build up your reputation and trust with customers so that you can hopefully keep them as customers for many, many years. But let's kind of move away from the sales side of things for a little bit. And before we get into the new property or the newer property, how are things been going this year at your home plot?
I mean, it's been going. It's kind of we're having grown pretty consistently on the property since I would have began last spring, even though I added some new beds. It's been maybe a bit of tight crop rotations, but definitely for some crops. I mean, a lot of lettuce followed by my spring mix, which is really just a brassica mix, followed by arugula, followed by lettuce, followed by spring mix. It's not advisable kind of crop rotations, but with the kind of space that I had and kind of hit my limit on the amount of space I could take in the backyard suburban property. It's kind of like you do what you can do. And so it's a lot of disease pressure slowly mounting. The insect pressure hasn't been too terrible, but it's been definitely the disease pressure, especially when we had a pretty wet fall coming into this year. That was kind of threw me for a little bit because it was just the constant rain following by the pretty poor, admittedly, crop rotation.
Yeah,
So,
let's talk about that briefly because I know you sort of got walloped with just big, huge rain event after big, huge rain event, and then suddenly found yourself in a bunch of drought. So kind of talk to me about what have been, and I mean, obviously, I know what the challenges could be, but talk to me a little bit about how you've sort of wrestled with that and hopefully found yourself victorious on the other side of those challenges.
So for the backyard suburban farm, that wasn't too bad as far as once we got into the drought. But during the wet periods, it was just a lot of having to increase my spacing on some crops because I was starting to pick up some pretty serious disease pressure in my spring mix in particular, which is a lot of tatsoi, Tokyo bacana, things like that. And then once we get into the drought, it's not too bad. It's overhead watered, the backyard farm is. And so I use old style impact sprinklers for that. And so, of course, pulling off a well, that's not a big deal. For the new property, having not really had worked the land until, or having not worked the land until the spring when I took the lease for the property, having kind of done a last minute push to go from part time to full time, wasn't aware of the kind of flooding problems on certain parts of the property. And so the more accessible parts of the property were the quickest ones to get turned over, quickest ones to get planted, and then they quickly found themselves underwater. And so there's a lot of the land that doesn't flood and held up pretty good during the time period, but having not experienced weeks and weeks and weeks of what felt like nonstop rain, having to go out there in muck boots with 6, 8 inches of water standing at least on in the pathways, it definitely did a number to some of the crops. Before that, they were going quite well, but nothing can do great, especially with that kind of wet feet, wet roots. And so coming into the drought, I pull primarily off of a pond. It's a almost 2-acre pond that I have a trash pump that I use, a gasoline powered trash pump to pull water off of. Originally, I was going to use the well, but there was kind of a breakdown in negotiation for that. And so I continued on using the trash pump pulling from the pond. But the summer drought was quite severe here to the point where it started, there was a solid 12, 18-inch drop on the water level in the pond. So where the intake was, now I look at it and it's sitting out of the water. It's probably 6 inches from the water line, sitting in where the water's dropped so far. So, but that thankfully, maybe it's a saving grace that some of the property floods quite a bit. The beds that had been flooding, they loved that drought. They held on to that water quite well, their water reserves. But for the backyard farm, it wasn't a big deal. But for the new farm breaking ground, I mean, of course, everyone advises you start year or two ahead of time. That wasn't in the cards for me. And so trying to turn over the ground, I mean, it was difficult as it was when it was dry, let alone when you have constant standing water and you're waiting for that, what seems like a 24-hour dry spell, and you show up 6 a.m. like, sorry, neighbors, hope you don't mind the tiller running all day, breaking new ground, trying to build beds before the next thunderstorm rolls through. So, but definitely coming into the year now on that same property, having had enough dry spells, because I did as much work as I could during the summer, and then a little bit into this fall, which was pretty dry. I feel quite a bit better, know the lay of the land, know which beds kind of perform better in what season. And so I can almost anticipate where the problems will be as we come into next year, assuming we probably still will have the kind of same rainy, wet spring. Hopefully not as bad, but you can expect spring rains.
Yeah, you hope that it's like, oh, this is a, what do they call, like 100-year rain event that seems to start happening way less than 100 years in between those intervals.
Yeah.
But no, and I think, unfortunately, unless it's a property that you've lived on or the people that worked it previously, I mean, it's just like you kind of have to learn your land as you're on it, as things happen, and it's just going to take time. Now you probably have an idea of like, all right, the low spot over here, if we get this much rain, we're going to have problems. And so, you can adjust your crop planning accordingly. So it's like stuff that is okay with having some wet feet can go over there, or maybe we just totally leave that block out of production in the spring. Maybe we just put a cover crop there or something, so that in the summertime, once things dry up, and you just cross your fingers and hope that, you don't get some crazy summer summer storms that could do the exact opposite. But what's the soil been like on that new property? I mean, obviously you're building beds and you're doing the things that you know to do to build healthy soil, but have there been challenges there working with the soil the native soil that you have there on that property?
The parts of the property that flood the worst are also the heaviest clay. And so it's a bit of a grading problem, which I hope to slowly address over time, maybe add some swales to deal with some of that kind of excess water from adjacent properties that flow into this one. But thankfully, a lot of the soil, besides finding, kind of large rocks,
Oh
six,
yeah.
8 inch kind of diameter rocks, outside of that, it's a nice kind of sandy clay. So it's not too hard. It seems like the spots that have the flooding problems have kind of progressively gotten worse. I mean, the land had sat, kind of it had gone fallow and then went overgrown for probably 5 years or more before I broke ground, which is kind of the deal with a lot of the kind of available property in this area. And so, but in the areas, yeah, that floods, it's a bit heavier of clay, but thankfully it's taken to the amendment quite well. So I've added quite a bit of compost, at least maybe an inch of compost across a lot of the beds, if not half inch. And so tilled that into the top 4 inches. And of course, I lean. I know you had a similar thing this year. Lean no till where possible, but breaking new ground, you kind of got to do what you got to do. And
Yeah, they call it
so,
breaking they call it breaking ground for a reason.
yeah.
But well, that's good. Overall, have you been pleased with, let's separate the crazy flooding, the things that are totally out of your control, but just in the areas that have, remained above water per se, have you felt pretty solid with the production that you're pulling out of that new property?
Yeah, I'm quite happy with, beds that drain quite a bit better or are not in a low spot. I think part of that is also just the time since breaking ground. I mean, having previously worked with the suburban backyard farm, breaking turf, which the soil there is quite bad and has a pretty hard pan layer, maybe 4 inches below the soil line. But turning the ground there, which was actually a lot of by hand, it took pretty quick. Getting crops into production, arugula, lettuce mix, and
Mm.
things like that. It took pretty well, and they were growing what felt like probably 90% of their kind of max that spring that I'd started last spring. But this new property, I think, having sat for so long, that was maybe what threw me the most. Of course, it takes a while for the kind of material to break down and the nitrogen to not be so tied up. But even with compost and manure-based fertilizers and things like that, it took quite a while. Now that it's been broken since the spring, I feel like it's probably hit its stride on production. From the spring to now, if I grew the same crop side by side, it would probably be twice kind of as fast, kind of in the overall production. So
Yeah, and I think that's going to be sort of the theme that's going to carry through the rest of our conversation is just this idea of lead time. Nothing is instant. Obviously, plants take time to grow, they take time to mature, but so does soil. So do sales channels and relationships and processes. Like all of these things take time. Yeah, and funny enough, you would think going straight into turf would be like the hardest way to go. And I think some of it is just crop, like you're saying, things like arugula, these little baby greens and stuff. Yeah, that you could almost just like throw them on top of concrete and they'll settle into the cracks and just shoot up. They want to grow. But land that has been previously used agriculturally, like, our property, we were the fourth person to grow on that property. Nobody before us had really done like market garden style or it was more of just like you till a bed, you throw whatever in it and you harvest it and then you till it again. There was not really a whole lot of management per se. And then in some of the areas that didn't have any cropping on them have actually been surprisingly easier than the spots that I know were consistently done year after year after year, which is funny because you always hear the kind of the adage of like, well, this, it's been really well worked soil and it's like a benefit. But in some cases, depending on the management style, that actually could be a huge detriment. It's like, man, yeah, this soil has been worked, but it hasn't really been fed. So it's just it's totally depleted. When we did our first soil test, I was like so disappointed because knowing the people that had been on there previously, and at one point before us, there had been a guy that was just throwing, 20, just regular fertilizer. And obviously it had been long enough that I wasn't super concerned with any of the ill effects of it, but I was like, maybe we'll have like a little bit of residual jet fuel in the soil and it'll take things off. And it just wasn't the case. And so going from a property that has been worked, but not necessarily in a really management intensive way, sometimes can be to our detriment than just a piece of property that's had really good roots in the ground, gets watered regularly like turf is. Obviously you deal with a lot of rhizomatous grasses and stuff, but yeah, it takes time. And, hopefully this year, like you're saying, you'll have much more success in those plots than starting out. Breaking new ground is always tough because you have so much expectation. You're like, it's gonna be great. We're adding more beds, gonna get more stuff in the ground, and then inevitably sometimes it's like, ugh, we didn't balance the soil well enough. We didn't amend it enough. We didn't, a myriad. Sometimes it's just the soil is more rocky than you expected, or really compacted, and But the reality of it is, it's like, all right, this is just going to be another part of this journey of building that up. Talk to me a little bit. I know we were talking offline about it, but tell me about this magical, perfect, amazing, life-changing high tunnel that you have on the property there.
Yeah, so I took the property over kind of seeing from the road, at 60 miles an hour. They had a nice 30 by 95 foot high tunnel. And so it had been put on the property with an NRCS equip grant, I believe, from the person who had bought the property a couple of years previous. They had planned on doing something with it, and then nothing really amounted. So that was part of kind of the negotiation for the property, was knowing, hey, you have this high tunnel, it's got to be used. The NRCS certainly wants something done with the money that they put in. And so, hey, I'd like to grow on this land, grow in this tunnel. And then again, having not really stepped foot on the property until there was snow in the ground, which was still kind of mid February, early January, mid January. I wasn't aware of the flooding, and so the high tunnel was kind of put in a low spot on the property. I don't know whose call that was or how that came to be, but it, became quite the nightmare when you put in, was it probably 500 plus tomato plants in a high tunnel that quickly, in the early spring, it seemed like when I was getting some of the cool season crops in, it wasn't too bad, planting mustard greens and Hakurei turnips, and they're kind of like, oh, the soil's a little wet, after it rains, but it's not too bad. There's maybe a little standing water. And then once we kind of got to that flooding portion, I went, oh, it's under 2 foot of water towards the back of the high tunnel. Like
Oh my
muck boots,
gosh.
you're sloshing through. You're having to, are you walking in the walkways, and might as well, just take your boots off at that point. There's so much water. Or, again, just kind of time working the land. If I would have started the previous summer, hey, I might have known by the fall that this is a problem spot. But there was kind of no way to know, just kind of going in blind. And so now kind of my plan is to do a bit of soil working, because it is a high tunnel, and I think it has. And I've got some amount of tomato production out of it, but we had talked I know in the previous one about doing heirlooms. And because I really love heirlooms, and I think the market in this area is prime for heirlooms. And turns out a lot of my heirlooms went in this high tunnel that was underwater. And so if, certainly if hybrids don't enjoy wet roots, hybrid or heirlooms definitely don't.
Oh,
So
absolutely not.
I think the only thing that kind of tolerated it was, this was also where I had planted a lot of my celery. And so, but I mean, even at some point, it started getting that kind of chlorotic leaves in a lot of standing water. And then I think it had been flooding for so long, like I said, something about the clay, maybe it was moving some of the sand out of it and just kind of compaction over time from it. But the clay is pretty dense. It's that once it dries out, it's, you kind of got to break it with an axe, or so that didn't turn out to be maybe as much of an asset this previous year as I thought it would be. And it's kind of, I mean, farming, you get a lot busier. I think that's something else that maybe I learned. You get quite a bit more busy than I had even anticipated, having, done a previous or business prior to this. And so all this time that you're thinking, oh yeah, I'll work on the high tunnel, get it broken and get it prepped for the fall. Yeah, that time quickly you're like, wait, it's
Oh yeah.
September. Where'd the time go? So that's kind of I've intended on getting some of that broken, planting and some of that, and I had already broken some of that, planting and some of that for the spring, but a lot of that I'm going to leave until the summer before I actually get anything, because I want that kind of lead time to be able to set apart the time in the spring to rework everything, try to deal with some drainage through the property, add some swales, try to redirect some water, so I can go ahead and hopefully use this pretty big asset coming into next fall. So, or I
Yeah.
guess fall of 2026.
So do you think like you've mentioned swales and kind of diverting some water away from that, like on the property as a whole? I mean, do you think that will solve the problem, or do you think that even some like more precise, berming up around the tunnel itself? I mean, do you think is that another thing that could be done? It's not going to solve all your problems, but it might be a bit of a more of a band-aid that, it'd probably be easier to berm up a 96-foot mini swale along the edge of a tunnel or wherever the water is, as opposed to like trying to build that up across an entire fence line.
So the property that I lease, it's about an acre and a half of what's probably is roughly a 3.5 or 4 acre kind of strip, and so it's roughly 200 and maybe 50 foot wide, and whatever long that would be to equal about four maybe acres. And so originally it was all graded to divert that water that comes off of the front of some of the farm property and then the adjacent neighbor properties and off of the road, because I'm along the roadway, to send that water back to a creek, however many, almost 1,000, I guess, foot back there. And then somewhere along the lines, the land had been worked, conventional. It was grown for hay, for a lot of it wasn't in vegetable production, went into vegetable production, went back to hay. I think in that time, not really been intensively managed. No one regraded it. No one went, hey, this is becoming a low spot here. I think it was purely coincidental, perhaps, that the tunnel ended up in the lowest spot of the property. And so sending a lot of the water kind of out of the property or into the back acreage, which is always also available in the future if I probably, could negotiate for use of that as well. But I think that's kind of the plan. So it would be maybe a 200-foot long swale. So it's not, maybe the easiest now that the beds have been built, and of course you don't want to ruin your progress on the beds that you've already built, the
Yeah.
compost that you've gotten in the ground to bring in any heavy equipment. But again, that's kind of that lead time. If, would have had a year to break ground, look at it, would have went, oh, let me get in an excavator or something before I get all this precious time put into building these beds by hand. So
Now, and call me crazy for thinking this. I'm just thinking out of the box. But what about the idea of moving the tunnel? I mean, I know it's possible. Our big high tunnel that we built this year came off of another property, and so it was taken down. I didn't take it down. But we bought it and then we had to put it up. And I'm not the first person to buy a used tunnel and put it somewhere else. So, I mean, do you think maybe not this year, but if you notice after this season that it's just no amount of water diversion is really going to make a difference, because you're still getting water dumped right there on it. Water shedding off of the plastic. It's hitting right at the base of the tunnel. There's only so much diversion that you can do. Do you think that maybe just moving the tunnel to higher ground to a drier spot would be an effective use of your time and labor to ensure that this spot is going to be, that prime covered greenhouse space that it could be?
I've thought about it, and I've had a lot of people suggest that. For
Yeah, let me
me,
just say
is
this. It's
your I was
easy
gonna
to
say
say it.
yeah,
It's
yeah.
easy to say, like, just move the tunnel. And it's like, but it's, there's a big part of it. It's like, it's here. It's a structure. Like, it's
Oh
not
yeah.
going anywhere.
Is y'all's anchored into concrete?
No, it's
This
not.
okay, this one is.
Okay.
It
So yeah,
has concrete,
yeah, ours is
like
kind of just
not a
pounded
footing,
2
but it
feet
has
into the ground.
concrete.
Yeah.
Yeah, yeah. No, it has concrete that it's set in, and I've thought about that. I've looked at that. And it's like, oh man, that's Yeah, it was meant to be permanent when
Gotcha,
someone put
gotcha.
it. I
We'll
know
we'll
high
scratch
tunnels
that.
aren't
Yeah.
necessarily meant to be, but so yeah, it would require quite a bit of maybe pouring anchor, footings or pads somewhere else to re-anchor it to. Which I don't know if that's. I feel like that's an unusual build for the high tunnel, but it was definitely intended to be permanent
Okay.
when they poured it in there. But no, yeah, it's if I came through this year here and I found that the low spot was still quite a problem, and I think it's going to amount to be a problem. I think the springs are going to be kind of rough no matter what swales I put in, what grading I do. Even if I build up the beds another 6 inches, it'll probably still be a problem at times. I guess my thing was more being that I am a bit less kind of labor wise. I prefer to put like front a lot more labor when it comes to crops, and so think like if I after this year, I much prefer field tomatoes to high tunnel tomatoes, and so for me, I almost feel like I can deal with the periods of the struggle, of the flooding if the crops can tolerate it, because I don't intend to get tunnels in there necessarily in the early spring where, oh, they're, kind of struggling. So,
I
more
mean,
kind of like
you've got
greens
these.
and then overwintering crops and things like that. That's kind of where I feel like that would be my long-term focus for this tunnel. And thankfully, I mean, even when there's snow on the ground, it's a lot less water to deal with. So,
Yeah. But I mean, you got these amazing hydroponically grown tomatoes in 2 feet of water. And, you you could, yeah, the possibilities are endless. And I think that's wise, because at the end of the day, obviously you're leasing the property, so you're not beholden to it. But, it's wise to just say, like, this is the hand that we've been dealt. And if we think that it's worth it, we can just work around this. And if you're not trying to get tomatoes in the tunnel as soon as humanly possible, like we are down here, then yeah, and if you can just sort of work around that and be like, all right, maybe we go into a cover crop, something that can handle some wet, just to keep roots in the ground to help fight against erosion. It's not going to hurt, and if you feel that doing like a outside determinate field tomato is a better use of the space, then yeah. I mean, I think there's no unwritten rule that says market gardeners must do greenhouse lower and lean tomatoes. There's no dogma that has to be followed in order to get your market gardener card. Everyone's soils are different. Everyone's lay of the land is different. And so you just have to do what you can do to, I mean, at the end of the day, not to take the mysticism out of it, but at the end of the day, it's like, you gotta make money. You gotta turn a profit,
mhm.
and you gotta do what you can do. So you're doing a lot of greens, baby greens, really quick turnover, high profitable stuff. What's been the majority of what you're pulling out of this new property? Like, what are you mostly growing over there? Same stuff or more longer season crops?
So in the spring, it was a lot of beets. I do a braising mix, and so for the braising mix, it's red mustard, green mustard, and turnip greens. And so that was a pretty big draw, as well as collards, kale, a couple different types of kale. Your ruffled kale, your lacinato kale, broccoli, cauliflower. A lot of the more kind of crops I know a lot of market gardeners steer away from. That's kind of been what I feel like I've slowly leaned more into doing. Because, I mean, part of it I think is definitely kind of figuring out what you also enjoy to grow and where your
Absolutely.
kind of labor works. For me, trying to do the tunnel tomatoes, I just I couldn't bear it. Even on a dry day, going in the tunnel and having to train each tomato. I'd done the field tomatoes, which were terminate and heirloom indeterminates, and doing like a Florida weave on them. I mean, even if it became a mess, I'm still pulling out tomatoes. It felt like just kind of, hey, I'll take the loss on, oh, maybe the increase in disease and insect pressure, but like, I'd rather put my labor towards that opposed to in the tunnel. And so I think part of this year is also kind of finding my stride on what I enjoy doing and what I do best. And if that's a certain amount of transplanting to grow broccoli and cauliflower and cabbages and things like that, which sell quite well at our market. Trying to move tomatoes, there's a lot of reselling at our market, unfortunately. And so there's a lot of that perfect red slicing tomato. The heirlooms did quite well, but you can only, trying to approach people with something new, it was a good way to get some of those customers to say, "Hey, why is this different?" But being that we don't have a big local food scene, there's kind of a lack of maybe discernment. And so a lot of that, similarly, getting the rush to getting tomatoes out, pulling out of the tunnel as quick as possible, doesn't work when you're selling in a market where there's a lot of reselling. And so, I mean, they're having tomatoes come the first market of the year, so
Oh,
it's
yeah.
you're not beating them to the finish line there. So I think leaning into the products where I think also visibly you can see the difference between a head of broccoli that someone grew themselves versus one that was bought in. Same with cauliflower. I mean, everyone has gone to the grocery store and has seen that nice, black tinged and the spottiness on the otherwise
Mhm.
perfect white head of cauliflower. I'd rather grow those things where it's easy to explain the difference. And in my experience, and so far, has been a lot of consumer education explaining, hey, why is my cauliflower going to cost more than a grocery store? If you can get the price, which is what I'm finding, if you can get the price for some of these crops that you need to get your per square footage or your per labor hour price, then, entirely go for it. And for me, it has been leaning away from that red slicer and leaning into those kind of more maybe conventional crops, more conventional tractor grown crops.
Yeah, and we're making that same pivot. I'm not going to have the gall to say that like all of the traditional market garden crops are no longer like they're sort of like losing their luster. Because obviously like lettuce still sells really well, baby root vegetables still sell really well, but I'll just say anecdotally from my experience with our market on all of our context, that yeah, just being a farm where you just pump out baby greens and baby roots all year long and you just, rake in the money, so to speak, it's just it's not there. There's a lot of competition. You know, I could grow all the Hackereye turnips in the world and they could be the best ones ever, but if 5 other farms have just as many as you do, we have that situation like there's no point in doubling down. If anything, we're cutting way back on a lot of that stuff. And yeah, we're gonna be moving more, do more broccoli. Obviously, we're doing like broccolini stuff that we're gonna get multiple, quote unquote cuts out of. Doing tighter successions, doing smaller ones that we can get in and out quicker. We're looking at a 45, 50-day cauliflower that it's not your traditional big, bulky, white, perfect head. It's a little bit looser. I think it's like a Japanese variety from Johnny's. But I'm hoping that just that quick turnover, being able to really cram a lot in there, doing little cabbages instead of like a big, market cabbage, stuff like that. We just need to have more diversity and we need to grow the things that people want to eat. And, and if everyone's flooding the market with salad mix and salad radishes and Hackereye turnips and baby carrots, like, unless you just happen to make it at a market where nobody else has that, like you have to diversify. And growing the things that people want is the best way to do that. And so it's just a matter of figuring out either sacrificing a little bit of profit to ensure that you can get any profit versus versus just like what's the fastest thing that I can sell for the most money, and that's how I'm going to be successful. I had that realization this year looking at another farm. They're much bigger farm. They pump out beautiful stuff, and they sell their stuff like basically a little bit cheaper than everybody else, and you have the thought, you're like, dang, like I can't sell it for that cheap and whatever. It's like, but they also have a line for 4 hours straight and you don't. And so it's like, okay, maybe growing cabbages and selling them a little bit cheaper and ensuring that you can move them. Like, yeah, maybe there is an element in that. No, I'm not going to go to straight, long season stuff like that, but incorporating some of that to just ensure that you can keep regular sales going. I think that's just kind of the reality of where we're at in the space. There's more farmers now than there's been in the past. People are a little bit more educated, and dare I say they've almost been sort of burned out on some of that stuff. And so, yeah, and I think now we just have the hard work is kind of the newbies coming in to be like, all right, how can we grow the stuff that people want, but still do it in a profitable way? Like I would have never thought that people would get excited about like baby butternut squash, like little 1 pound itty bitty ones. I'm thinking like, I want like a big hefty one that's going to like feed my whole family, and realizing it's like, no, people like they have more appeal because they're small, they're easier to manage. They can buy 2 or 3 of them and, do it. Because, I mean, I don't know about you, but most of our market customers are single people. It's a couple. We have families, but the predominant customer base is individuals or small, very small families. And so having small, manageable things like that. And so, yeah, we're going to do way more winter squash, which is definitely on the like no list for most market gardens. But, if we're pumping out a bunch of little baby butternuts and acorn squashes that we can still sell for $3-4 a pound, which I feel like for those longer season stuff is a really good price, then we win at the end of the day. We win, our customers win, and maybe our profit margins aren't as great, but we're able to fight another day, and ultimately we're growing food that people want, which should be the end result. We're not trying to just convince a bunch of people that they need to eat Tatsoi every day of the week. That'd be great, and we could make way more money doing that. But it's just where we're at in 2025 as new growers. Is we've got to find things that the things that sell. So, but with all that being said, let's talk a little bit more. You talked about dealing with the competition of resellers at your market. How has that market done this year compared to what you experienced the year previous?
So sales in the fall of what would be 2024 were pretty good. Coming into the kind of final markets of the year, it was a bit cold, so the sales dipped for last of the couple ones. But that was what really made me feel pretty encouraged about going full time. Coming into the spring, the sales just weren't there. Some of that could be because of the reselling at the market, and some of that could just be I mean, it seems like a lot of people say farmers markets are unfortunately going downhill kind of across the board. Sales or attendance seems to be dropping at a lot of markets. So for ours, we've definitely had quite a bit of a drop in attendance. But it's also just kind of sales, unfortunately, dropping for some of the more niche products, which is what's changing kind of my crop selection coming into 2026. I mean, you had mentioned the tatsoi. I can sell tatsoi, but only in kind of one bed at a time for 1 week or 2 weeks at a time. Outside that, people aren't interested in tatsoi anymore. I feel that same way about like bok choy. It seems like you go online, you see a lot of people growing bok choy, and I can sell 3-4 heads of market, but is that worth the trouble to go through? I'm not finding it. But potatoes, surprisingly done entirely by hand, including digging them by hand, selling us fresh or new potatoes as well as cured. That was an easy sell. There was very little difficulty, even cured. A lot of people are used to potato. It's very easy to say, hey, this is a lot better than you've ever had in the grocery store. And I had quite a few repeat sales of people coming back looking for just potatoes while getting some of the other items at the resellers. So it's that kind of, but like microgreens were the same thing. There's a very loyal customer base for microgreens, but it seemed like from last year coming into this year could have to do with the economy and always a million other things. But there was definitely, it seemed like a downturn in the purchasing of the microgreens, which is unfortunate because I'm really the only microgreen grower in the county, which is 160,000 people. So it's kind of like having a monopoly on the microgreens. It doesn't work when it doesn't seem like people are buying them as much anymore. And it could be, unfortunately, I feel like a lot of market gardening is when money gets tight, people kind of start to cut back and buying microgreens and bok choy and things like that. Definitely would probably be early on the things to be cut back. But yeah, no, it's dampened my expectations coming in 2026. I'm trying to diversify. Outside of that farmer's market, my plan is to pick up new retail locations to really push the online store. I'd mentioned the convenience aspect earlier, but I mean, it's hard to convince people in this area to come. Our farmers market is also, unfortunately, entirely on a parking lot, and how kind of the spacing is done. We tend to have pretty high winds and pretty high temps, a lot of radiant heat from the asphalt. And so getting people to come out in the middle of the summer, if they don't come out by 11 o'clock, the kind of market dies by noon. And so, because it feels like it's 110, as they're walking through the market. And so I think pushing the online store, using the connections in the social media presence that I've tried to build to push people to the online store for pickup and delivery. Like, hey, you don't have to get here early in the morning, or hey, you can go pick it up through one of these kind of little locations I'm trying to set through the county. But equally so is been looking into starting my own mini farmers market, kind of
Yeah,
roadside, more
let's get into that a little bit
yeah.
more. I'm curious when you mentioned starting your own farmers market. I was like, okay, I need to hear more about this.
So there's been some pushes and attempts in the area to start some non-sponsored farmers markets. The biggest one, which is the one that I sell at, I'll call it sponsored. It's done by the town, and admittedly, I think it's run at a loss every year. Like how much money they're taking in, and so starting farmers market is quite the undertaking. I have looked at and have seen where people have sold roadside at a couple locations in the area, and it was simple enough as to say, hey, if I get a couple other farmers who are willing to tag along, work out an agreement with the property owner for setting up here and pull the permit or two, which is required, because thankfully it seems pretty lax in the area, and is pretty lax as far as where you can set up and which properties are zoned for doing farmers markets and craft markets. It's kind of something that I'm working on to try to get figured out to start in the early spring, because again, we don't have a lot of alternatives. So it would be a Saturday market at the market I already do, and then would be a Sunday market at this kind of roadside market, which would be visible from the road, which has, admittedly, it's per week, but I think upwards of 35, 40,000 cars travel on that road. And
Wow.
so just that one direction would be 15, 20,000 almost. So it's, of course, a Saturday or Sunday's quite a bit less, but hey, I guess knock on wood, if I can have the signage up and, advertise,
Mhm.
we'll be set up here on Sundays, get that signage out on a Saturday. I think that's quite a few eyes on the farmer's market, that, calling it a farmer's market, the little mini market. So, and then I think for me, it's kind of course, I'm selling at the little mini market that I'm doing right now, indoors at the Raw Juice, but it's building that kind of recurring customer where even if they don't come every week, it's a part of their schedule. They can park close to you. It's not a big undertaking. And to be able to extend that into what would be then the winter season with an indoor mini
Mhm.
farmers market. So just kind of keeping that customer connection, because from last year to this year, even with doing the deliveries and the social media, it seemed like there's an unfortunate amount of people that just kind of, like, hey, you had bought from me for 30, 32 weeks almost straight. Where'd you go? And
Yeah.
unfortunately there was quite a bit of that. And so it's trying to keep that customer connection, staying in the routine, having that face-to-face interaction, even if it's not every week, every other week, once a month. So,
Yeah.
there's that kind of, they feel like a part of your family. They keep coming back,
Yeah. Let me ask you the tough question. What's keeping you from driving to Alexandria, for instance, and getting in at a more established market that's a little bit busier, and obviously you're coming in at a much lower point than everybody else at established, but obviously I'm speaking from experience here, but what's keeping you from doing that as opposed to trying to bolster all of this, kind of this uphill battle of bolstering a lot of this local customer base?
It's kind of two things. First is, I think long term, seeing my business, it's a good jumping off point for a lot of people. But I think, especially as I age, I'm 29 now. Add 20 years, am I interested in doing farmers markets with an hour and a half, 2 hour drive, plus the setup and everything else? It's an easy transition, admittedly, not getting ahead of myself, but it's an easy transition from a local farmers market to a farm stand and things like that. So it's kind of seeing that angle, but also honestly, I've talked a lot of smack on social media about people leaving the area to sell, and hey, I'm trying to put my money where my mouth is. Unfortunately, there's really only 4 or 5 kind of, I would call, like produce farms that are growing for a living, where it's not just some guy selling out of the bed of his truck in his front yard. There's really only 4 or 5 in our county, which is again 160,000 people. Out of that, 2 of them don't sell at all in the county. And or this is again the farms that I can find that have a social media presence, and I can find the directories. One of them sells in the area out of a farm stand that they do, but they sell at other farmers markets, including the Alexandria markets. I'm kind of outside of someone who's another suburban farm. I'm really the only guy who's selling in this area and is growing it in this area to sell in this area. And so I think it's kind of putting my money where my mouth is. I said going into this that I'm trying to build back up this agriculture, build back up this local food scene, and people knowing what a local farm is. I mean, and unfortunately, it seems like there's quite a bit of a disconnect between consumers in this area having kind of the big, seems like all the farms having left prior to COVID, but especially during COVID, that it seems like there's a lot of people who just don't know. There's a lot of reselling that's kind of filled that void. And I mean, I think part of it is just trying to build that brand, sell locally for that. And then I also see, unfortunately, a lot of other people who aren't, some of them are doing it full time, but a lot of them are trying to do it part time. And that's equally a struggle in this area. You know, when you don't really have a local food scene and you're trying to sell some of these more niche goods, think like what would be like raw milk, eggs, things like that, and you don't have any like good established customer base for like knowing what that farm connection is because everyone kind of left. I think it's part of building up the, I don't know, that I guess the knowledge in what farming is, people knowing what farming is, and then also kind of admittedly seizing that what feels like a ripe opportunity if I can get to the right people. But it's that kind of, you know, if people are used to reselling, they're used to a tomato at a farmer's market, unfortunately, the first week of April. They're used to it at the last week of November. The same with watermelons. And it's a certain amount, you know, without talking bad about people, but it's a certain amount of trying to explain to people when, you know, you see next door posts, for example, if people are like, where can I get a local watermelon? It's the first week of April. And they're saying, oh, try from this and this farm. They grow it themselves. And you're like, I know you, they don't, you know?
Yeah.
So it's that kind of, you know, trying to connect with people, get people to understand that like we can have local agriculture. That's not just me. And we can buy in the area these products.
Yeah.
Because I mean, certainly I imagine a financial, you know, decision for y'all going to a bigger market with more customer base, but admittedly, I have a feeling that also probably a lot more people grow. A lot more people know what maybe local food is. But it
I
certainly
mean,
doesn't seem like
definitely.
that around here.
Definitely. Yeah, I mean, and we're in a really rural area, and we have within 15 minutes. No, there were 6, and now there's 4. I'm trying to get my on my head. You know, they're like organic farms, or at least certified naturally
Yeah.
grown farms, within 15 minutes of me.
Mhm.
2 of them left. Not they didn't stop farming. They just moved elsewhere to you know, they moved their business. And so, you know, we do have a lot more ag in the area, but we ran into the same issues. You know, I could go Athens and Monroe, the 2 places that we've sold, they're like
Mhm.
30 minutes away from each other. Like it's
Right.
not 2 worlds apart. And, you know, the customers that we had in Monroe, you know, they were super loyal. They bought stuff. It was great. It was just like the sheer foot traffic, it just wasn't quite there. And, you know, we've moved to Athens, and, you know, we've doubled our drive for sure. You know, we're driving an hour every Saturday morning, and it's a slog, you know, but now that I've done it every week for a whole year, you know, it goes by like that. It's just kind of become a part of my routine. And, you know, and we've more than doubled our sales from last year. And I would have said a year and a half ago, and it's like, I'm, you know, small town, and I probably have said that on this podcast, if not
Yeah.
on the one with Diego, that it's like, no, I want to be different. Where, you know, I had all of these ambitions and all these goals that I still do. You know, our slogan is still real food for real people. None of that's changed. But just the reality of it for us was, it's like, if I still want to continue to grow food, I have to be able to earn a living. And, you know, going from 20,000 in sales in 25 or in 24 to like 55 in 26. Obviously there's a lot more expenses in there too, but still, like, for us to more than double our sales in 1 year, and the biggest difference has been just our sales outlet. I'm beginning to understand now why people tend to leave a smaller city, more suburban area, and go to them. You know, and Athens isn't a huge town. They only have one farmer's market, as opposed to Atlanta that has, like, feels like every week there's a new one popping up. I feel a lot of the same way that you do. My hope is that now that we have a good strong footing an hour away, that now we can then start to work back home, if that makes sense. So now,
Mhm.
you know, we're still selling to a restaurant in Monroe, a couple of restaurants depending on the time of the year. We're selling to 2 restaurants in Covington, which is kind of the city, like kind of the closest city to where we live, looking to expand to another city that's 15, 20 minutes down the road. Like, so, and then we're even talking about maybe trying to do some on-farm sales out here in the country, you know, where there's the closest grocery store is a Dollar General. I mean, food desert
Yeah.
stuff, you know all about that. And so it's like the way that I've trying to envision it is I had all these ambitions of trying to be super hyper local, and it just, for us, it just wasn't cutting the mustard. It just wasn't doing it. So we made the jump to go further away. And now, hopefully, years 4, 5, 6, we'll begin to work backward. And now that we have the foundation of like, we know we're going to have sales, we know that we can stay in business. Now let's try to bolster that local stuff. So, but dude, I totally respect it. I respect the thing and what you said about like, do I want to be doing it every Saturday morning 20 years from now? I mean, that's another real thing. You know, I've talked to a farmer who, we were just talking over dinner a couple nights ago. You know, he did a farmer's market every Saturday morning for 25 years. And then when COVID hit, he pulled out and, you know, started doing other market streams. And the market that he was at is now has some openings. Some other farms have left. And I'm like, dude, like, this is your moment. Get back in. Like, you know, they need you back in the game. And he's like, no, man, like, I like having my Saturday mornings with my family. I like not having to get up at 4 a.m. And so, you know, I respect that as well. And it's just, I wish you the best. And I hope that it sounds like not only are you're not idealistic, you're not like head in the clouds. You have some real strategy on how you're going to do it. And you seem to have a real collaborative spirit that makes you want to work with other people and not just like, I'm going to do this, even if I have to do it by myself. Like, no, you want to get as many other people involved as you can and enlist the community to help you with that. And so I respect the hustle. I respect the game. And I hope that it will work out. And I usually feel like if you're willing to put in the work, you know, stick to your guns, that hopefully it will work out in the long run. But overall, as we sort of land this ship or this plane, we sort of talked about how you felt going into 25. And now that we're at the end of 25, overall, how have you felt about this year?
I'm happy with what I did with what I had. Kind of, you know, working with what's available, working with the struggles. I mean, you can put in all the effort that you can. That doesn't mean always everything works out. And so I feel happy with kind of what I've taken out, you know, given the factors, the flood and the drought, the property issues. And I mean, it leaves me pretty optimistic for now going into 2026, kind of what I know now, the land that I know, the sales streams that I know, kind of, you know, what I'm able to do coming into 2026.
Awesome, man. Well, I wish you the best. One, I'm just so excited that I get to do this and follow up with you and kind of keep this story going. And hopefully people will be invested and be like, when is he going to come back for 27? And, you know, just kind of follow your journey in the same way that people have been following mine. But, yeah, and this sounds weird because we're definitely equals. I'm not in any way saying, but it's like, I'm proud of you, man. Like, I know I'm in your shoes. I know what it's like to get on a new property, get a new high tunnel, and you have all these expectations. You know, our high tunnel was a bigger dud this year than I thought it was going to be as well. But keep at it, man. You know, you've got a good head on your shoulders. You seem to know what you're doing. You're not quitting. And I wish you the best for the rest of 26 and hopefully for those 20 years moving forward.
You too, man. You too.
All right. Thank you so much, Colton, for sitting down again with me this year and doing that. I hope this can be a tradition, maybe not forever, but for at least a few years. We can sort of touch base every year and get an update, sort of a state of the farm of where things are at as your farm is growing and building and evolving. And if this is something that you're interested in, if you're a rookie farmer or you're just getting started, or maybe you've been growing for a long time, or you are in an industry that is affected or affects agriculture and market gardening, please consider reaching out. We would love to hear from you, and maybe we can follow along with your journey as well. A huge thanks, as always, to Diego and the whole team over at Modern Grower for making this show possible. None of this would be able to happen without you guys. So a huge thank you from the bottom of my heart. And if you need your farm tools like the Jang seeder, paper pot transplanter, quick click seeder, that's always so hard for me to say every single time, or the Sumi Soaker, quick hoops, and all of the amazing things that they have over at Modern Grower, please consider going to shop.moderngrower.co, and you can check out an amazing curated list of farm tools designed explicitly for the small scale market gardener like myself, and probably like you as well. They have made me a better grower, and I know they will make you a better grower as well. And if you'd like, you can click on the affiliate link in the description of this episode, and that'll take you to the page where you can order as usual. But we will get a little bit of a kickback, which will help make this show possible. And also, just a reminder that we believe in value for value, which means if you are getting insight, if you're being inspired, if you're being educated by the content we're doing, we never want to charge you. We never want to put it behind a paywall. We never want to ask you to sign up for another membership program so that you can have access to our content. We always want to make this free. And that means that we're not charging you a dime to do this. But if you are getting value out of this, please consider kicking some of that value back our way in the form of a donation. You can go to Cash App, Venmo, PayPal, and you can look for Crop Culture Farm or at Crop Culture Farm. And you can send us $1, $5. Every little bit counts. If you had a particularly amazing farmer's market and you want to share some of the love and share some of the wealth, please consider kicking some of that our way. Every little bit helps, and it takes resources. I want to build out the barn into a bit of a studio so that I don't have to shush my kids when we're doing these episodes so that you don't hear them just on the other side of that door there. And all that stuff isn't possible without your generous support. And if you have a question or a comment about the show, you can attach it to that donation. I will happily read it aloud on the show, give you a shout out. Maybe you want to shout out your farm or some cool thing you're doing, whatever it may be. I will gladly do that on the show. And if the question is applicable, maybe we can even ask one of our guests and get their input on it as well. We're a big community, and there's no reason why we can't also share in sort of the R&D and answering some questions for you. But anyways, thank you guys so much for staying tuned to this one. I hope we can do more of these follow-up episodes in the future, maybe more this year and in years to come. But you've been listening to the Rookie Farmer Podcast. I'm your host, Alec, and until next time, blessings and peace.